Hello, I am Kayla. I am the content creator here at KandidKayla.com, and we are a platform that is dedicated to growing ourselves, in ourselves, and for ourselves through the 8 dimensions of wellness. Today, we're going to go ahead and get started by talking about how to build a life, more specifically, taking ownership of our lives and building our lives, being an active participant in our lives. So, if you're interested in that, please feel free to stay tuned and we get started. So, every podcast we get started with a prayer. So, I'm going to pray and then we're going to jump right into it today. So, dear Jesus, please be with us, be with me as I speak on this podcast and be with the listeners as they receive it. Lord, I ask that your word would permeate and that you would speak and it wouldn't be me. In your mighty name I pray. Amen. So, as I said before, hello everyone. I am Dr. Kayla Word, and today we're going to be talking about building our life. So, there's a particular song and it's called Build My Life, and it's literally one of the biggest contemporary Christian songs on the market and has been for quite some time. But I remember hearing this song back in 2016, I think, maybe 2017, somewhere in there. I was singing on the worship team in college, and we had a guest worship leader come in and play this song, and he wanted to sing it. And I just remember, like, the song resonated with me immediately. Like, I learned it. It was a song I had never heard before, and I immediately learned the song and sang it in front of my congregation in the matter of maybe a half an hour. And I just remember immediately, I think he went through the song, maybe through the parts of the song twice, and I picked it up, and it just, the words resonated with me, the melody resonated with me. It was such a beautiful song, but I just remember that song being so powerful, and the words go like, the bridge says, I will build my life upon your love, for it's a firm foundation. I will put my trust in you alone and not be shaken. And I just remember I was in a very interesting season of my life, but I was like at this pinnacle where I was about to graduate from undergrad, and it was like I could be grateful for what God had done up to that point and the foundation that had been set up to that point. And I was nervous but expectant for what was to come. And now, coming on the other side of that graduate degree, which is where I went after undergrad, I can tell you that my life is a living, breathing testimony. I am currently living the life that I had always imagined in a way that I didn't think was possible. And even still in this moment, I'm like in the middle of another transition season, and the song just came back, and I just had this reflective moment the other day as I was about to board an airplane that I've built my life on Christ, and I'm so grateful, and I have so much gratitude for what was, but I'm so nervous and expectant for what is, because if he could do what he has done in the past, he's going to exceed every expectation I have for the future. And I just really wanted to be an encouragement and share what I did in order to get to this place. Like I said, I am living the life I had always dreamed of, and that's not on some manifestation type stuff where I visualized it and it came to pass, but it's more in the fact that I prayed and I fasted and I put in the work in order to see this kind of fruit. And I know that the story I'm about to tell is like probably unbelievable for so many people, but even more so, I think if you didn't live it with me, you're probably going to be like, well, how did she come to this place of self awareness and come to this place in her relationship with God to be able to do some of these things? And I can say that the Lord is freely given to each and every person, and we have an opportunity to be active participants. So if we do that, He is faithful to meet us wherever we are, but we just have to choose to participate. And I was taught that at a very, very young age. And as a result, that is why I had the faith that I had to do some of these things. So, just a little bit of a background about myself, and then I'm going to get into the story as a whole. But when I say I'm living the life of my dreams, I have experienced some really miraculous things in my life. I have a PhD, and I have paid not a single dime for any of my education thus far since leaving private school when I was 12. So my parents paid for private school from ages 2 to 12 because I was ahead at 2, but because of my age, they wouldn't put me in kindergarten. So my mother went the private school route, and private school just wants your money. So they'll do whatever is in the best interest of them getting more money. And so my parents kept me the private school route until I was 12, and at that point, which I'll talk about, I haven't paid for a dime of education. I also have been privileged enough to make money from my educational journey. I purchased my first home. I have literally gone on countless trips, international trips, domestic trips. I have lived a very full life. I've also just been in a very awesome situation where I feel fulfilled when I wake up in the morning. I feel like my life has purpose. And that doesn't mean that my wellness still doesn't struggle in terms of like, I still get slightly depressed sometimes and anxious and things like that. And just like everybody else, when I don't know where God is taking me, specifically for me, my triggers are like transition periods where I don't know where God is taking me and I forget where He's brought me from. But all in all, I have lived and I am currently living a beautiful life. And I think that is a testament of what I'm about to share with you now. So, when I was 12 years old, I began praying for the life that God would call me to have. So, prior to being 12, so from ages about 8 to 12, I really, really struggled with depression bad. I was in this very interesting transition period within my family where I went from being the only child to now being one of like 5 or 6 in the house at a given time because my parents were foster parents. And it was this dynamic where I couldn't find my fitting, and I felt like my parents only wanted me to be a help for the other kids. And so then there was like this struggle with my identity. Then there's like the coming of age struggle, right? Where you don't know who you are, who you want to be. And then there was this other piece of the struggle where it was like I didn't have a place. I was too black for the white kids and not black enough for the black kids. And I was too girly, but not girly enough. And it was all of these different dynamics that were based in ingrained in social norms that we now attest a lot of them, which is so exciting for me to just see how this next generation has said we don't have to fit into these boxes. But when I was growing up, it was all of it was boxes. That's just what we did. Everything. If you didn't fit in a box, then people couldn't categorize you. And if you couldn't be categorized, then there wasn't a space for you. And I just felt like I was very alone for about 4 years where I couldn't speak to my parents about the things I was going through because, in a lot of ways, and I don't knock them, my parents are great parents, but they would like mock the struggle because as an adult, you're going to work and you're raising kids and you're doing all these things, you're tired and everything. And then you see this child, and this child is crying out and saying, "Hey, I feel like my life is unfair and I don't like the life that I'm living." Meanwhile, they're working hard to build this life for you, and they feel like you're ungrateful, or they feel like you don't have any real struggles because you're so young. And I don't knock my parents for that. They have since apologized, and they definitely didn't do that with my siblings. But for me, it was just a lot. So I felt alone and isolated, and to a point where I had contemplated, you know, ending my life at some points and all of the things. And thankfully, God knew better and He had greater plans. But in the midst of just this crazy season, I had also begun to attach myself to people who also were depressed and things like that. So then you begin to get around unhealthy people, and their unhealthy mindsets bleed over into your unhealthy mindsets. And all of these things, even though I was a child, are things that many adults struggle with on a daily basis. And so I just from living this, thankfully, I had a very, very firm foundation of Jesus Christ from a very young age. I was raised in the church. I was saved at age 3, and I was baptized in the Holy Spirit at age 8. So, literally, like right before I went into this very dark season, I had experienced the power of the Holy Spirit in my life and knew Him for myself. And so it was Him that carried me through these moments. But in carrying through these moments, I had no choice but to know, like to call on Him in these moments. And so I just remember being in my room. I was maybe like 8.5, almost 9, maybe 9 already. And I just remember being in my bedroom, and like my mom had told me to go clean my room, and my room was like toe down, which is, now I know as an adult, is a reflection of my internal space, right? So if I'm feeling anxious and depressed and all the things, my environment tends to be affected as well. And I just remember sitting in my floor, and I had a CD in my like radio box. I don't even know what we call those things anymore. And I pressed play, and there was a song on there, and the song was just so sad. And I just remember crying and crying and crying and crying. And I just asked Jesus to help me. And I just remember Him coming to me. And even though that was like the beginning of my journey through this dark season, I knew He was with me. Anyways, when I got to age 12, I remember hearing that same song again, um, and being in my room at a different house in a completely different state. And I remember how He had comforted me in that season. And I cried out to Him again, and I just remember Him. I don't remember Him telling me to begin praying for my life, but I just remember praying for my life in that moment. And so I began to speak in faith and pray in faith things that I wanted to see, right? Like I didn't know, like I knew I kind of wanted to be a doctor up to that point, but I didn't know what kind of doctor and all those things. And I just remember getting so much clarity in these sessions where I would just go and brainstorm, like, Jesus, it would be nice to have this kind of life, and what does it mean to be successful, and what does it look like to have a fullness of life, and how does that physically look like in terms of, do I want to be like 25, and what does that look like at 25, and all the things. And I just remember having this view of like this young woman who was very accomplished and was financially together and had her own place and her own apartment with some dogs, and like lived this very full and enriching life where she had friends and she had love and she had joy. And I just remember praying for that and standing on that. And from there, just developed this, I don't know, catapult of things. And so I just remember like it wasn't something that happened overnight. And I didn't see it for a long time, right? So if from 9 to 12, I was like chronically depressed, I would say that from 12 to 17, it was like this roller coaster where I would go through cycles, and I would be fine, and then something would happen and I wouldn't be fine for a long time, and then I would be fine, and I would keep going through these cycles. And I just remember I was a liar. I would lie like all the time. I really didn't have any fruitful relationships. All of my relationships were either built on people using me, or like abusive style relationships, or they were just broken, just very, very broken, where like you go and you like tell everybody's business and everything, or like even being, not having self-worth in myself, or this internal struggle of like, how do I make choices when I feel like I'm living a life where my choices don't matter? Because remember, I was a child, so like if I want to go to another school, I can't just choose to go to another school. That's not my decision to make. If I feel like I'm being bullied by the individuals in my space, there's nothing I can do about that except for show up every day. You know what I mean? Because if you tell somebody, then you become a snitch. And if you don't tell anybody, then you suffer in silence. So I just chose to suffer in silence. Or I felt like I was depressed again because it was like this never ending cycle, and I felt like I couldn't get out. Or I was struggling with like who I was. Like I really just didn't know who I was. I had this struggle with my self identity. And I think all of this just came to a head. And even in the midst of after praying those prayers, I still had to learn how to work the steps in order to break these things off, to live this fruitful life, this beautiful life that I wanted to live. I came up with 7 things that were those action steps that brought me to those spaces, right? So these 7 steps, again, were not the overnight cure. And just because I'm living the life I imagine now doesn't mean that I don't still endure struggle. So I still have to keep putting these 7 things into practice. But nonetheless, it allowed me this space to be able to grow and build this life. And I think everybody has this opportunity and we should all take advantage of it. So these 7 steps are participation, obedience, persistence, patience, gratitude, intentionality, and consistency. And I just lived out these steps. I didn't really know where they came from. I had, you hear sermons here and there, but each of these 7 things, I've just now, in this moment of gratitude, been able to kind of put them all together. And I also found that this is scriptural and had no idea. So in Luke 6:46 through 49, and as I've said in the past, even if you don't believe in God, here on this podcast, we do. And whether you believe or not, the foundations of the Bible have stood the test of time to be, for no other reason, a fundamental for moral guidance. And so, even if you don't believe that the Bible is the living, breathing Word of God, at least take the wisdom for what it is. So, in Luke chapter 6, verses 46 through 49, Jesus is teaching, and he's teaching about a specific principle, which is how to build a house. But that principle of how to build a house can kind of teach us how to build anything, including our lives. So, how can we build our lives on foundations that allow us to stand the test of time, but also to live the life that we've always wanted to live and to be fulfilled in that? So it says, why do you call me, in verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on a rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck the house and could not shake it, because it was built well. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck the house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. So, seemingly, this just sounds like, okay, somebody built a house on a rock foundation versus somebody building a house on a sand foundation. And when the waters came, clearly the house that was built on the rock foundation didn't move because it's built on a rock foundation, while the one on the sand foundation, the sand came from up under it, the house collapsed, it crumbled. But even deeper than this, I think it shows us a lot about our relationship with God and our relationship with ourselves and how we view our lives in order to actually build our lives in the way that you would build a home. So the first thing is you need to be an active participant. You need to take ownership of the life that you live. And that we can see in verse 46, it says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? So why say you want to participate in your relationship with God, but not do the work? And this podcast is very much so about doing the work, and KandidKayla.com as a whole in 2021 was about doing the work and what it looks like to do the work and how to put the work into practice. But I think I would be remiss to not start by saying, in everything that we do, there's going to be work to be done. And so you can't just have life happen to you. You have to take ownership of the life that you have. And it doesn't matter what that looks like, right? Like I said, when I had first come across this, I was a child, and I felt like every single thing that I did didn't impact the life that I wanted to live, right? Like if I lied, okay, there's no consequence for me lying because I'm a child. I'm just going to get in trouble and then I can move on about my life. But these principles and these foundations that you have, they affect you later on. So if you're a liar, you're gonna lie yesterday, you're gonna lie today, you're gonna lie tomorrow. So you want to stop being a liar so that when it does come time for your choices to affect the consequences of your life, you don't put yourself in a situation where you're being dishonest about the things that matter or being dishonest at all, to be quite honest. In the same way, I think it takes a certain level of participation to come to God and say, Lord, I want to live a better life. Like that's part of the participation. He says, seek and you will find, ask and it will be given to you. If you don't have the gumption in your soul to ask, then it won't happen. Like he can do all things, he can do anything, but we gotta ask for it. We gotta be a participant in it. Like, yes, he's the Lord of our lives and he is like this great big being that can move stars, create planets, and know your name, though. He can know your name. He knows how many hairs are on your head. So he wants to know you intimately. It's not just about the plans that he has for your life, but also about having that active relationship with you to know you and for you to know him back. And so when the first thing you have to do is take ownership of your life and to become an active participant in your life, understanding that what you put in, God can exponentially grow in order for what you take out to be beneficial versus you just kind of seeing what happens. The next thing is you have to have obedience. So the verse says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, right? But do not do what I say. As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. So it's one thing to come to God and to say, I want to be an active participant in my relationship with you. I want to be an active participant in my life. I want to build my life. I want to build a life that I want to live. I want to build a life where I'm happy and I'm whole and I'm full and I'm joyous and I'm fulfilled in the life that I'm living. And life isn't happening to me. I am living life. I am actively doing something. I'm action something. After you do that, though, he's going to tell you what to do, and you got to do it. And sometimes it's not what you want to do. Like I said, I was a liar. I was a cheat. I was struggling so deeply with my self-worth because I didn't know who I was and I didn't know who I wanted to become. You don't think that it took work for me to figure all that out? Like God had to strip me and had to take me through things in order for me to become that person. Prime example, I did not want to move to the Midwest when I was in high school, and I moved to the Midwest when I was in high school. While it was forced obedience, nonetheless, it was obedience. And I could have sat with my arms crossed, whining and complaining the whole time. And I'm not going to lie, I did for about a year. But then we had Spirit Day one day at school. And I remember I wore the colors for the school that I had came from because that's where I felt like I wanted to be. That's where I felt like my heart was. And I remember a friend of mine, Aaron, shout out to Aaron, pulled me to the side and was like, why are you not wearing school colors? I told him, I was like, I'm doing this in rebellion because I belong. My heart belongs to my other school, right? And he was like, when are you going to realize that you're here for a reason? And the reason why you're here, like embrace the reason why you're here. And I remember that struck me so hard, like it hurt my feelings a little bit, but it made me a better person because in that moment I learned a very, very valuable lesson that even in forced obedience, full obedience is complying to the obedience. Like, you can't just do the things and not have a heart transformation as a result. The obedience starts from the inside, even if you are starting with just outward duty. And I talk about this all the time. When you don't feel like doing something, at least do it on the outside until your heart starts to work on the inside, like the fake it till you make it type of mindset. But the other part of that is at some point, if your heart isn't being transformed by what God has called you to do, you're going to have to do it again. So you might as well just go ahead and get it over with. You know what I mean? And so that obedience and being obedient to that, when you come to Him and you say, Lord, I want to be a participant, when He tells you to do something, do it. So when it came time for me to build this life, right, that I said I'm loving and I'm enjoying, I wanted to go to another college than where I went for undergrad. I wanted to go to Howard University. And I remember the Lord speaking to me so clearly and telling me that's not the place for you. That's not where you need to be. If I'm going to be quite honest, the short version of the story is I had the choice out of high school. I could have went to Howard University and gone to a four-year university straight away, or I could have went the community college route and gone to a school that I was called to go to. And I could have done whatever I wanted to do, but Howard University came with bills, debt, and going the community college route came with me getting paid, not debt. And at that moment, I had the choice between my pride and what I thought and what other people saw me as and what other people believed about me versus what I believed in myself. And in that moment, I had to make a choice. Was I going to be obedient or was I not going to be obedient? The obedience was for me to go to the community college route. All of my friends left. I was stuck by myself. And to be quite honest, that decision was probably one of the hardest I had ever made in my life because it wasn't easy even living in it. I was depressed in it. I didn't want to be there. But at some point, you have to walk in the obedience of God, even if you don't want to, in order to get the game that He's called you to have. And that's what I had to live. That's the life I had to live. That's the path that ended up sparking the greatest decisions of my entire life thus far, occupationally. But had I let my pride win, had I let my what I thought other people wanted of me to win, I wouldn't have been able to make that choice. The next thing is persistence. So in verse 47, it says, As for everyone who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice, I will show you what they are like. So persistence, this word practice, okay, I kind of feel like Allen Iverson sometimes, where it's like, I'm too good, I need practice. That's a lie. Persistence is practice. Practice is I'm doing something repetitively before I'm tested on it with the intent to pass the test and to grow and to become better, right? But you don't know when the test is coming sometimes when you're putting it in practice. And that's just life in and of itself. And so after God tells you to be obedient with something, are you taking those principles that you learned in that obedience, in that act of obedience, and are you putting it into practice in your daily life? So back to the example of being acceptant of every season that God puts you in and gaining the knowledge that you need in every season that God puts you in. Like I said, when I lived in the Midwest, I wasn't particularly happy about it, but I ended up learning things in that season, how to be a good friend, how to even make friends, because I felt like all my relationships up to that point had been slightly, not all of them, but a lot of them had been very toxic and very abusive. And it wasn't until I had moved to the Midwest that I had realized that those relationships were so abusive. And so, how to identify abusive relationships, how to ensure that I'm not in abusive relationships, and how to be in relationships with people that love me and I love them back. You know, how to be open, like very, very open about who I am truly, how to foster a healthy relationship with my parents. Because when I moved to the Midwest, I was like maybe 14, I think. I think I turned 14 right before we moved here. I wasn't too far off of that cusp where I felt like I couldn't say anything to them. So to really learn how to trust them and to foster these healthy relationships and to be open with them about how I was feeling so that I could get the assistance and the help that I needed in order to succeed. All of these things are things I learned in that season, but I had to put them into practice every day. I had to be able to do the work and to put it into my daily rotation so that in those ways where I didn't like my life or I felt like my life was unfair, I could start changing over the tide a little bit and gaining more ground in pursuit of the life that I wanted to live. So in verse 48, it says, "They are like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock." The fourth thing I had to do was I had to have patience. Digging deep, let's talk about this for just a slight moment. Digging deep is not something that we can just do right away. We are not human bulldozers and cranes and diggers, and I don't even know what the equipment is called, but we can't just go and dig a deep hole with no equipment in 2 hours, right? Or in 2 minutes, excuse me, right? It's going to take us closer to 2 hours. We're going to have to dig. We're going to have to put in the work. We're going to have to be not only persistent, but also patient because it's going to take time. So, in that same way that that persistence capitalizes on time, right? Because we're practicing things or we are taking advantage of the time, we also have to realize that we have to be patient in the time that we're taking. And this isn't this isn't the fun part. Okay, this is the part that everybody will skip over in their beautiful story, and they just want to tell you about how you were one way and now you're another way. But it's the patience to believe that God is going to do those things, the patience to watch Him do it, the patience to be an active participant in it when it doesn't happen overnight. I prayed that initial prayer when I was 12. I was crying out to God on my floor when I was 8. It wasn't that I felt like I was happy and fulfilled until 2015. So I was 20. So just 12 years 12 years of praying, 12 years of fasting, 12 years of God, I need you, 12 years of crying, 12 years of I don't feel like it, 12 years of I feel broken, 12 years of I don't have a space in this world, 12 years of I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know who I am, I don't know where I need to be. What is this life that you said that I could have, and why do I not feel it? Why am I not embracing it? What is wrong with me that I don't have this life that I feel I deserve? Right? It was in that patience that I had to learn resolve, to stand firm on what God has said, even though I don't see it. And like I said, I went through this cycle, so I'm not going to say that it was something that I was good at. I'm still not particularly good at it. I'm a very impatient human being. But I have come to appreciate the power of patience because you have the opportunity in that space where you have to be patient to learn what you need to learn for the season when it arrives. And so it says here, they are like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on rock. And I think it's the patience of us digging that allows us to build the firm foundation, right? It allows us to not only get to that space of foundation, because I think sometimes we have so much other fluff in our life that we got to chisel through the fluff to get to the good foundation. Like, I think we have so many things that kind of make us dirty or stain us or inhibit us from being able to see God for who He is, like abuse and the way that we see ourselves in the world. And let's say your dad left or your mom didn't like you or whatever it is for you. Like, all those things inhibit us from being able to see God as the beautiful foundation by which we could place anything and it will hold, it will last forever, because we've had people disappoint us when it comes to time. Time didn't heal our wounds, it just compacted the dirt on top of our foundation. And we got to get to a space where we're digging up that ground, digging up the dirt off our foundation so that we can get to a rock solid foundation. a foundation that is built on purpose and love so that we feel fulfilled, so we enjoy the fulfillment that comes with that. But it's this patience piece that is so key. The next thing I had to learn was gratitude. It says at the end of verse 48, when the flood came, the torrent struck the rock that when the flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. Okay, so the flood and the torrent in this case is the things that come with life. It's being triggered by that same dirt I was just talking about, having triggers that remind us of the dirt that was on top of us, that was on top of our foundation. It is the things that come out of nowhere and they try to knock us off our balance. It's the things that sweep us off our feet sometimes and cause us to kind of forget what our foundation is and that our foundation is strong. But gratitude is what allows our house not to be shaken. It's when we remember, right? So, like I said, the first time I ever journaled, and I really believe the first time I had ever felt that I was truly happy was in April of 2015. And I wrote it, and I wrote this beautiful journal entry about it. And I was like, for the first time in my entire life, I think I feel happy, not joy, not, contentment, but truly happy. Like I could look around, and even though I wasn't in the space where I knew I was going, I felt like God I was living out my dreams in that moment, even though the dream wasn't complete. It's in those spaces where you can take inventory. I say take inventory even in the bad spaces, especially in the bad spaces, but it's a lot easier in these good spaces. On that day, I took inventory of where I had come from, every tear I had cried, every night I had prayed, every time I felt like I was cast out or I was ostracized or I was hurt or I wasn't truly appreciated in the ways that I felt like I should be appreciated and all those things. It was in those moments that I realized that my foundation was firm because everything around me was going haywire, but I was grateful for what he had done. And in knowing what he had done, I can stand firm for what he's going to do even in the midst of the chaos. And I think, especially when you're in a bad season, taking that moment to be grateful, to know that, okay, the storm is coming, the winds are flowing, the flood is here, the torrent, is trying to break down my foundation, but yet and still I can stand firm because if my house could stand when there was dirt, when my foundation could stand when there was dirt on top of it, how much more can my foundation stand when I've actually built this life of beauty and joy and everything on top of it as well? And so in every season, that doesn't mean that I don't go through things and still have to take inventory and still be gracious, right? And to still have gratitude. But not forgetting this is what allows you to not shake, which allows you not to waver, because from gratitude flows faith. I mean, it's just like an immediate thing. It's like a domino effect. As long as I can be gracious, or not gracious, but like thankful, that's the word I'm looking for. As long as I can be thankful, everything else kind of falls into place. Because if I never forget what he's done, if I never forget to be thankful for who he is in my life, who he is and who he says he is, then if I don't forget that, I will always remember who I am, what I've built. The sixth thing is intentionality. So it says at the end of that sentence, when the flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it because it was well built. The man had to build the house. You got to be intentional about how you build it, how you build the life you wanted, how you build the life you want now, you want to live in the future. Like you have to be intentional, and if you're not intentional, it's for nothing. You have to purposely say, I'm going to build it on a firm foundation and not in the sand. But that intentionality, that moment of like decision and internal conflict, that is how you ensure that it can endure to come, right? Let's say I had just my foundation and I'm beginning to build my house. And instead of using, I don't know, wood studs, I use plastic. Well, if the flood comes, it might withstand some plastic. But if we get a heat wave and the flood comes, the plastic is gone. It's going to melt. In the same way, we have to be intentional about what we put on our foundation. I akin this to when building this life that I'm living now, not only was I obedient, but there were some things that were my choice, things that I chose to add or not choose to add, and I had to be intentional about what things I chose to add or not to add. The best example of this for me are the people that I attach myself to, the relationships I attach myself to. I can choose to be involved with individuals who are all right in the season they're in and have no aspirations to go anywhere. I can attach myself to people who are equally hungry, equally driven to fulfill the purpose that God has for their life. I'm going to choose intentionally to be around other people who are driven and purposeful because iron sharpens iron. So, in the ways that they're driven, it'll help build my faith for me to be driven and vice versa. In the same way, though, you have to be intentional with everything. I can choose financially to live in the city or on the outskirts. That's a choice. The obedience came when he just said, buy a house. I could choose wherever, right? He leaves the choice up to me. I can choose to live in the city, and for whatever reasons, that could be a pro or a con for you, or I could choose to live in the outskirts, and for whatever reason, that be a pro or a con to me or for you. And in the same way, being intentional about those decisions, understanding that my foundation isn't going to move, but is the other things I'm adding to it going to stand, that's important. So I think that's the next key. I don't think that is the next key. It's to be intentional. The last key, sum it all up, put a bow on top. Make it pretty. He says in verse 49, but the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. The last thing is consistency. So he says in verse 48, when the flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it. And let's say that the torrent hit once, it's not going to shake. But it says in verse 49, the moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. If you're not consistent in making sure that every time the torrent comes, you can hold up, the things you've built can hold up, then the life you want to live probably isn't going to happen. Because as soon as something inconvenient happens, just as soon as you get a little bit of opposition from the enemy, just as soon as something out of the ordinary that you didn't account for, you didn't plan for, comes into play, you're not going to know what to do. The life you built is going to fall and it's going to crumble. And that ain't it. So the life that you want, the life you've worked so hard so far for, will just crumble to completely. And so you must be consistent in applying each one of these principles, consistent in making sure that you're maintaining these principles in all that you do. Like I said, I'm living the life that I always imagined, but that doesn't mean that it still takes work to maintain. I can't just achieve this life and then get tired and don't want to improve it and don't want to upkeep it. It's like buying $1 million home and then letting moss grow on the side and weeds in the yard and mold inside because you just kept it cooped up and never did anything to it. The life has to be lived. It has to be lived, and you have to be consistent in the way that you live it. Always reassuring that every decision that you make, every way that you maintain all of your wellness is going back to that firm foundation, isn't it? And is in accordance with the foundation. See, sometimes we have a tendency to put too much on our house. And if I go and I try to park a dump truck in my house, My house is going to fall apart from the inside without the torrent ever coming because I was never meant to put a dump truck in my house. In the same way, we have to make sure that our foundation can support whatever we're putting on top of it. So if you have big dreams and big plans for what God has for you, well, then that's the deeper your foundation is going to have to be, because you're going to have a broader foundation in order to support it all. And so we have to daily, literally daily, if you want to live the life that you want to live, like if you want to live a life that's fulfilled and the life that you always wanted to live, a life where you are happy and joyous in the season that you're in, you're going to have to put in the work. And I call that maintaining your 8 dimensions of wellness, with the key being your spiritual wellness and your relationship with God. Because if that's straight, the rest kind of falls into play. But understanding what God has for you and knowing Him for yourself, so that if He tells you to pivot, right? Or if He says at the last second, we're going to put an extra deck on the back of this house, do you have the bandwidth and the capacity to maintain that? Or are you going to miss out? You're just going to have a door on the second story of the house that leads to nothing. I hate houses like that, just a side note. So that's all I had to say about that. I hope y'all can start building the lives that you enjoy and that you love and that you want to live. And even if you're starting to build that, like, please share your stories. I love hearing people's stories and even things that you've learned, like in the comments on YouTube, or you can send me a message on Instagram. Let me know, like, what have you learned in your house building journey, if you're even building your house or building your life, okay? Building the life you've always wanted to live. What are some key things that you've learned in your journey, and how does that apply to the scripture here that where Jesus is talking about building this house? So if you guys have made it to this point, thank you so much. You guys are so amazing. Appreciate you. Um, as always, you can connect with me on our socials as well as over on YouTube in the comment section. Thank you so much for your time, and until the next podcast, bye.